Her boyfriend John kept staring at his water glass as he nervously fidgeted with his napkin.
Oh no, not again,
she thought, squirming in her chair. When Kate asked him twice what was wrong, all he would say is, nothing. That's when she felt a stabbing pain in her stomach because she knew what was coming next. As the knot in her stomach began to twist, she decided to try something a little weird, something I taught her earlier that day. Slowly, she took a deep breath as she let slip out 3 innocent, playful words, and then, all of a sudden, she saw the sparkle return to John's eyes that she hadn't seen for weeks. For the rest of the evening, he couldn't stop smiling and touching her as they talked. It was like a switch had been flipped, and it didn't stop that night, because 6 months later, he got down on one knee as he smiled and asked her to be his wife. Hi, I'm Bob Grant, and today I'm going to share with you the real reason why men suddenly break up with amazing women, especially when everything's going good, and how whispering these 3 trigger words into any man's ear literally changes his brain chemistry, which causes him to constantly daydream about you. When you sit next to him, his pulse will start racing as he hangs on your every word. Now, I know that sounds crazy. Believe me, most of the time trying to motivate a man with words works terrible. But that's because the words women use work on other women, but often fall on deaf ears when tried on a man. As a relationship coach for the past 20 years, having taught over 4,000 women this very secret and receiving countless wedding invitations over the years, I'm still pleasantly surprised when a client comes back, weeping with joy, telling me she couldn't believe that it worked. Like Ashley, who was burnt out from a string of relationships with non-committal guys, but then used these 3 simple words on a man she was falling for, even though it felt completely unnatural, and now she's engaged. Or Stacy, whose airplane pilot boyfriend used to call her every day, telling her how much he loved and missed her, but then suddenly stopped after one fight. In fact, they started fighting a lot after that. She thought she lost him until she sent these 3 words in a text, and before she knew it, he texted back with an apology wanting to make up. Then there's Alicia, who was a divorced single mom with 4 kids. She thought she would never find a man again. Who would date me, she cried in my office. But armed with what I taught her and those 3 magic words, within 6 months, she found the love of her life, and she got married in Maui, her dream wedding spot. You see, once I discovered these 3 simple trigger words, I realized they activate a series of bonding stages inside a man's mind. And without him realizing what's happening, he develops an overwhelming need to be with you, and you become the only woman he wants, now and forever. Thoughts of all other women are repelled, as if they never existed. Now, to be clear, these 3 words have nothing to do with talking about the relationship, asking for commitment, or even getting him to talk about what's on his mind. In fact, you do not want to do this at all. These touchy subjects put pressure on a man. And if you've ever been in a good relationship where the man pulled away, ghosted you, blamed you, strung you along, or hurt you in any way, there's a good chance you may have, consciously or unconsciously, put direct pressure on him. These 3 trigger words are subtle, indirect, and almost hypnotic, putting a man into a trance-like state, hungry for you. Now, before I share with you how this works, I need to tell you about Sherry. Sherry was a client of mine, one of my earliest. And it's because of her that led me to discover the crucial stages a man must go through in order to bond with a woman, and the secret trigger words that activate these bonding stages. She literally changed everything about how I work with women and help them with men. Now here's what's strange about Sherry. Sherry was a stunning hairdresser. Blonde, blue eyes, bubbly, the whole package. She looked like Miranda Lambert. What's more, she smiled often and was easy to talk to. And as you can imagine, she had no trouble getting dates. She'd had several boyfriends by the time she came to see me, but here's the thing. Here's what's weird about Sherry. Her relationships never lasted beyond 6 months. And it wasn't because Sherry got bored. It's not because she was a diva. She's not. She genuinely wanted those relationships to work out. By all accounts, she was everything a man would want. Beautiful, smart, and loyal to her man. But in the end, they would always dump her. And she couldn't figure out why. It was like her relationships had an expiration date. And Sherry really did try. Post-breakup, she would dissect what led up to it. She would ask herself if she was too needy or clingy, if she talked about the relationship too much, or if she asked too many questions. She'd think to herself, maybe I was a bit too much here. And for the next relationship, she would fix it, improve herself, and try harder. She even dated down because her friends and family said she was being too picky. She wasn't. But none of it worked. Come the 6-month mark, almost every time the boyfriend would act all funny, there'd be a fight, and poof, Sherry was single again. So one afternoon, she comes to my office. She's been dating Dan for 5 months now, and she's freaking out. She's freaking out not because she's about to hit the cursed 6-month mark. She's also freaking out because she really likes Dan. Dan is everything she wants in a man. She thinks, no, She knows he's the one. And she's feeling that awful sense of dread, that for no good reason at all, Dan's going to leave her in a month. History would repeat itself. So Sherry tried harder. She went down her checklist, making sure she wasn't being clingy, invasive, or anything. But that's when something hit her and scared the living daylights out of her and drove her to me. You see, after triple checking her list and being ruthlessly honest with herself, she could not figure out a single incident where she put pressure on Dan. She'd been, by all accounts, the perfect girlfriend. Or had she? The creeping doubt snuck in. Maybe there's something wrong with her at a root level. Maybe she's boring. Maybe she's just not lovable. Maybe she's just not enough for any man to stick around with. And here's the thing. When Sherry showed up at my office and told me everything about her relationship with Dan and all of her past boyfriends, I looked deep into her eyes and knew she wasn't lying. She wasn't bluffing. She was as honest as she could be. There was nothing wrong with her. And that's when I freaked out too. Why? Well, I have a confession to make. You see, at the time, I wasn't a very good relationship coach. In fact, the first 6 years of my career, when I worked with women in their relationships, it was often hit or miss. Truth is, I was trained as a therapist. And if you've ever been to therapy, you know all they ever talk about is you. It's your fault, it's your past, it's your childhood. You have some issue to work on, something to fix, or some other deep-seated insecurity. You need to be more positive, more confident, and be more, or some flavor of that. And that's what I did. I focused on treating the individual woman, working on her, as if it was always her fault when the man left. Sometimes this worked. Sometimes it didn't. I wasn't happy with the results. It wasn't reliable, and frankly, I wasn't sure if what I was doing actually helped the women who came to see me. Now, don't get me wrong. Therapy, psychology, and counseling have their place. But from my own experience, working with thousands of women, it just didn't help with unlocking a man's heart, getting them to open up and bonding with you. What actually works was something else altogether, something that works on any man regardless of who you are as a woman. So back in my office, as I sat there listening to Sherry, seeing this incredibly attractive, confident woman talk, for the first time in my career, I was just dumbfounded. As a therapist, I could usually zero in on something and work on that. But with Sherry, I simply didn't know what to say to her. There was nothing wrong with her. Everything I learned as a therapist seemed wrong. That's when I threw a Hail Mary, and I asked her to bring Dan into our next session. I'd never done that before. I never asked a client to bring in their boyfriend or husband. And to be completely honest, I was really just buying time. So the week after, she brings Dan in, and everything Sherry said was dead on. Dan was a great guy. I could see the two of them getting married, buying a house together, having kids, the whole 9 yards. But something was missing. I could tell Dan wasn't fully committed. What was missing, though? I couldn't crack it. I asked Sherry to leave the room, and when Dan was alone with me, I outright asked him, "What's going on?" Dan tells me he loves Sherry. He wants to be with her. He can see she's the perfect woman. He tells me he can't see himself with anyone else, but something is holding him back. He can't put a finger on it. And it's not like he has commitment issues either. He's been in long-term relationships before. Even almost got married once. So at this point in the session, I'm freaking out. What in the world is going on? Here are two human beings in love with each other. They want to spend their lives with each other, ready to go all in, but couldn't commit. Something was going on here. I thanked Dan for coming in. I almost told Sherry that I couldn't help her, and she should fire me. But I looked at the two of them together, and I refused to give up. This was wrong. My training was not enough. There had to be another answer out there. So I sheepishly asked Sherry to give me another week. I needed more time. I was ready for her to say no, but to my relief, she agreed. And that's when I hunkered down to figure this out. And I said earlier, I knew therapy wasn't the answer. I had to go outside of my comfort zone. So I started reading all the relationship books out there. There wasn't a lot 20 years ago. Remember, this was before the internet got big. You had books like The Rules, Why Men Love Bitches, and How to Succeed with Men. And a lot of these books talked about playing games, improving yourself, being more positive and confident. The magazine articles I read were worse. They just talked about buying new clothes, getting a new hairdo, or spicing things up in the bedroom. I was hitting a wall and getting desperate. But I knew what I was looking for wasn't a fantasy. After all, I'd had several friends who were now loyal, devoted boyfriends and husbands, men who I personally knew, who used to laugh at the idea of settling down, and dated multiple women at the same time. What's more, the women who finally captured their hearts, some of them were average looking. Others were not the fittest, that something about them flipped a magic switch in these men. And it was at this